I decide what happens tonight.
Not while I'm standing here.
She didn't even knock. Madeline Brooke marched straight onto my porch, slapped a violation slip against my chest, and said, "You're hoarding community fire resources, Trent." Her tone was sharp enough to cut bark, and the winter wind wasn't the only thing stinging. The board chair didn't blink, didn't hesitate, just stood there like she owned my home, my yard, and the last firewood my brother ever stacked with me. "You picked the wrong week to provoke me," I told her, low, steady. Her smirk faltered for half a second, just long enough for me to see she hadn't expected resistance. "And before you say another word, remember, I'm a certified fire inspector. Every log on that rack still answers to me. If you've ever felt that surge in your chest when someone tries to bulldoze your boundaries and you finally push back, stay right here and hit the subscribe button right now. Because what she did next, it turned a simple dispute into the kind of firestorm people talk about for years. And before we go further, where are you watching from?" Madeline scoffed, brushing snow off her crimson coat. "Your qualifications don't matter here. Your firewood falls under seasonal redistribution, HOA policy." "There is no seasonal redistribution policy," I said. "You invented that." Her jaw tightened, but she kept performing authority like the officer of rules she believed she was. "You have excess wood. The community hearth nights require fuel. We're entitled to a portion." I stepped closer, letting her see I wasn't afraid. "You're entitled to nothing I didn't offer, and you've already taken more than you admit." The clipboard queen wasn't expecting that. Her eyes twitched toward the cedar wood rack beside my shed, the one my brother and I built by hand the last winter he was alive. Every notch in the frame still held his fingerprints. Every piece of cedar carried memories no one else had the right to touch. That rack wasn't just storage, it was a monument. She didn't care. "This wood will be used for the benefit of the entire community," she insisted, "and you will comply." "That's not community use," I said quietly. "That's you hosting your little bonfire socials and pretending they're HOA sanctioned." Her mouth twitched. Hit. She didn't expect me to know about the private events she called hearth nights, where she burned through supplies she had no right to take. "You're out of line," Madeline snapped. "If you keep resisting, I'll escalate enforcement." "You already escalated," I said, "last night when you stole from my rack." Her eyes widened the smallest fraction, a flicker of guilt buried beneath arrogance. She tried to hide it, lifting her chin like the tyrant in heels she was. "You can't prove that." "I don't need to prove it," I replied. "I saw the boot prints." A storm passed across her face. Anger, caution, calculation. She was used to neighbors who cowered, not to a man who understood ignition points, pressure loads, and what happened when you pushed combustible materials too far. I swallowed hard, grounding myself before I said another word, because the truth behind my anger was heavier than any stack of logs. The last time my brother and I worked here, we were laughing while we split cedar under the pale December sun. He wiped his forehead with a gloved hand and said, "This is the stuff that keeps families warm, Trent." A week later, he ran into a burning building and didn't come back out. The rack was the final thing we shared. The wood inside it wasn't just fuel, it was memory, legacy, grief carved into grain, and she took it. Madeline turned toward the steps. "Expect fines, and a mandatory donation adjustment." "No," I said firmly. "Expect consequences." She paused, glancing back with that cold HOA smirk, until she noticed the hollow logs on the rack, the ones she assumed were full, the ones she had no idea I used for training demonstrations. She didn't know what she was looking at, but something in her expression changed, curiosity mixing with unease. Good, because she had no idea what she'd stolen the night before, and she had absolutely no idea what she was about to ignite. She walked off my porch with that same clipped confidence, but I watched her steps, too quick, too stiff, too aware of what she'd almost let slip. Madeline Brooke wasn't the type to show nerves, but something about those hollow logs unsettled her in a way she couldn't hide. The board chair prided herself on control, and losing even a fraction of it rattled her. I stayed on the porch until her footsteps disappeared down my drive. The cold bit into my fingers, but the burn in my chest was sharper. She hadn't just stolen firewood, she'd violated the last piece of my brother I had left. The officer of rules treated everything like paperwork and possession. To her, my grief was an inconvenience. To me, her theft was personal. I headed down the steps toward the cedarwood rack. Frost glistened across the frame, coating every joint my brother and I cut together. I rested my hand against the wood, letting the memory steady me. The rack felt emptier than it should. It wasn't just physical loss. It was insult layered on disrespect. And she expected me to bow to her? Not this time. A crunch of gravel made me turn. Mr. Lewinson shuffled along the property line, wrapped in his heavy brown coat, the steam of his breath trailing like smoke. His eyes traveled from the rack to the path Madeline had taken. "She came by early," he muttered, voice roughened by age. "Saw her carrying something last night, too." My jaw tightened. "You're sure?" He nodded, leaning on his cane. "Saw her loading wood into that fancy SUV of hers. Didn't look like official. Business?" Of course it didn't. The clipboard queen never did her dirty work in daylight. "Thanks," I said quietly. "You didn't have to tell me." He shrugged. "She's been taking from folks for months. You're just the first one who might actually do something about it." I took that in, the weight of his words pressing against the cold air. The community wasn't blind. They were afraid. Madeline Brooke had built her authority on intimidation, fines, and cleverly twisted policy. People didn't challenge her because they didn't know how. But I did. As Mr. Lewinson headed home, I turned my attention back to the rack. I focused on the empty spaces, the indentations in the snow, the subtle shifts in the surface where logs used to sit. She'd taken at least 5, maybe 6, enough to fuel her next unapproved bonfire event. She didn't even steal efficiently. She stole emotionally. I crouched down, scanning the area the way I'd examine a fire scene, looking for impressions, direction, weight distribution, and there it was, the faint imprint of her boot tread, a straight path from my rack to the road. She hadn't even tried to hide it. That arrogance was going to cost her, and she didn't know it yet. A gust of wind cut across the yard, carrying the scent of distant smoke, not fresh, lingering, from last night's bonfire. My stomach twisted. She'd burned my brother's cedar without knowing what it meant. Or maybe she did know, and she didn't care. I stood and took a slow breath. The firewood wasn't just a theft. It was a violation. A line crossed with full intention. Behind me, a sharp voice sliced through the wind. "Trent!" I turned to see the enforcer in crimson, Madeline herself, storming back up the drive, coat whipping behind her. She never gave people space without a reason. "What now?" I asked, keeping my tone flat. She stopped a few feet from me, breath visible in irritated bursts. "I received a community concern," she said. "Someone reported that your woodpile is a safety hazard." I stared at her. "A safety hazard? It's stacked to code." She lifted her chin. "According to my inspection, it violates winter guidelines." "There are no winter guidelines," I said. "You made those up this morning." Her eyes flashed, that familiar spark of HOA tyranny flickering under her mascara. "If you refuse compliance, I'll be forced to issue a formal citation." "You already issued one for imaginary redistribution," I replied. "You want another for imaginary hazards?" The tyrant in heels inhaled sharply, masking frustration with false calm. "You're being difficult." "No," I said, stepping closer. "I'm being observant." Her jaw twitched. She hated being challenged by someone who knew more than she did. She hated even more that she couldn't manipulate technical knowledge. She turned abruptly. "Expect an official notice by evening." As she stomped away, kicking snow with every angry step, I watched her shoulders stiffen. She didn't know it yet, but she had already made the first mistake in a war she couldn't win. She made it personal. And I wasn't done. Madeline Brooke hadn't even reached the corner of the street before she was already on her phone, gesturing sharply, her coat flashing like a warning flare in the frost. The enforcer in crimson always needed an audience when she felt her authority slipping. I watched her pace back and forth, voice too loud, too pointed. A woman trying to rebuild control she felt cracking at the edges. But she wasn't the only one watching me. A quiet figure lingered near the mailboxes, clutching a stack of envelopes to her chest like a shield. Ellen Ruiz, the HOA secretary, the one who typed Madeline's memos, enforced her notices, and apologized through closed doors when neighbors cried. She avoided my eyes at first, But she didn't walk away, and that alone told me everything. I headed down the driveway, frost crunching beneath my boots. When our eyes finally met, she tensed, shoulders lifting almost to her ears, hands tightening around the envelopes. She wasn't defiant like Madeline. She looked caught in the crossfire. "Morning, Ellen," I said, keeping my voice even. She swallowed hard. I didn't know she was coming by your place this early." "Yes, you did," I replied gently. "She doesn't step onto a property without telling her secretary." Her cheeks flushed, not embarrassment, fear. "She said it was urgent, that your woodpile needed to be addressed." Addressed. The clipboard queen loved that word. It meant punish, accuse, control, whatever suited her mood. Ellen shifted her weight, almost retreating but not quite. "Trent, I didn't write that violation notice. She did. Actually," she pushed the form across my desk and told me to sign her name on it. My eyebrows lifted. That was new. "She had you sign her name?" Ellen nodded quickly, her breath clouding the cold air. "She said it didn't matter, that no one checks signatures." Her voice trembled. "But they do check them, don't they?" "Yes," I said. "They do." She squeezed her envelopes tighter. "I thought so." From across the street, Madeline shot a sharp glance toward us, possessive, suspicious, controlling. Ellen instantly straightened, stepping a half-inch backward like she'd been caught speaking to the enemy. "Relax," I whispered. "I'm not doing anything." "That's the problem," she murmured. "Talking to you is doing something." That was the moment it clicked, her internal tug-of-war, loyalty versus conscience, fear versus integrity, the pressure of working under a tyrant who demanded obedience from everyone while giving none in return. And Ellen was cracking. "I didn't want to sign her notice," she whispered, eyes darting between me and Madeline. "But she said if I didn't, she'd tell the board I was undermining governance." "That sounds like her," I replied. Ellen nodded, eyes shiny. "She's getting worse, Trent. Ever since those community hearth nights became her project." "Bonfire parties," I corrected. "They aren't sanctioned events." Her lips parted, but she didn't deny it. "She's taking wood from multiple homes," she admitted shakily. "You're just the only one she can't intimidate." That was when another sharp gust hit us, scattering a few envelopes from her hand. One slid past her feet, and when she bent to grab it, I noticed her fingers trembling. Not from cold, from being trapped under Madeline Brooks' rule. "Ellen," I asked quietly, "how many violations has she written this week?" Her throat bobbed. 9. 9? I repeated. "She's looking for leverage," Ellen whispered. "On everyone. On you. On the board. On the neighbors she doesn't like." Her voice cracked. "And she keeps bringing up your brother, saying you're emotionally unstable about the firewood." My jaw tightened. Hard. "And you let her say that?" I asked. Her face collapsed with guilt. "I didn't know how to stop her." That was it. Her internal conflict laid bare. Every movement, every broken sentence, every downward glance revealing the weight she carried. She wasn't siding with Madeline. She was surviving her. But she wasn't ready to help me. Not yet. Madeline barked her name from across the road. Ellen jolted like she'd been yanked by an invisible leash. I need to go," she stammered. "Ellen," I said softly, "you did the right thing by talking to me." She shook her head, fear overtaking her again. "No, not yet. Not until I know she can't hurt me." She hurried back toward the tyrant in heels, who pulled her aside and began whispering harshly in her ear. Ellen didn't look back at me once, but she didn't need to. Her internal struggle was just beginning, and soon it would rip the whole facade wide open. Madeline Brooke didn't give the neighborhood a moment to breathe before she launched her next attack. By noon, 3 new emails hit everyone's inbox, each stamped with her signature, each dripping with that same icy condescension she wielded like a weapon. The officer of rules announced a mandatory emergency fire safety audit, claiming residents were improperly storing combustibles. An accusation so vague it could be applied to anyone she wanted to pressure. And she wanted to pressure me. The timing wasn't random. It was retaliation. I stood near the edge of Pine Hollow's community trail when my phone vibrated again. Another notice. Another accusation. She'd escalated faster than usual. That meant one thing. She knew she'd overstepped this morning, and she was scrambling for control. The enforcer in crimson appeared at the trail bend moments later, her coat slicing through the winter air like a flare. She wasn't alone. 2 HOA board members trailed behind her, both looking uncomfortable, both clearly dragged into her mission, whether they agreed or not. She approached like a prosecutor about to deliver a sentence. "Trent Calloway," she called out, voice sharp enough to crack branches. "We need to conduct a site inspection of your firewood rack immediately." I turned slowly. "You already inspected it, twice, this week." She smiled, the fake, polished kind she used whenever she was about to twist reality. "That was preliminary. This is formal." One of the board members, Mr. Hensley, cleared his throat. "Madeline, maybe we should—" She cut him off with a razor-sharp glance. "We're not here to debate." Her authority depended on speed, intimidation, and certainty. If she stopped long enough for someone to question her, her whole performance would collapse. And I could see the fear behind her posture, anxious, wired, cracking under its own weight. "They're logs," I said, "stacked properly, inspected, not your concern." "Everything is my concern," the clipboard queen shot back. "When a resident violates policy, it becomes my responsibility to correct it." "There is no policy," I said calmly. "You made it up." A muscle in her jaw flickered. She didn't like when I said the quiet truth out loud. "We need to see your rack," she insisted. "You mean you want to see what's left of what you stole?" I said. Hensley's eyes widened. The second board member shifted uncomfortably. They knew she'd crossed the line. They just didn't expect me to say it publicly. Madeline stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Watch your accusations?" "No," I replied. "Watch your behavior." She exhaled sharply, masking the wobble in her confidence. "Bring us to the shed, Trent." "No," I said again. The air tightened around us, heavy and cold. The board chair wasn't used to resistance. She wasn't used to someone matching her pressure without flinching, and she certainly wasn't used to someone who could dismantle her with technical precision. Her eyes narrowed. "If you won't cooperate, I'll mark this as non-compliance." "Mark whatever you need," I said. "Just make sure your documentation is accurate. The county fire marshal takes forged records very seriously." That name hit her like a slap. Chief Danner wasn't someone you invoked lightly in a fire-prone region. His inspections were thorough, his consequences severe, and he had the authority to override an entire HOA board. Madeline straightened, mask reassembling. "You're being hostile." "No," I said. "I'm being careful." A gust of winter air swept past us, rustling the pine needles overhead. The 2 board members exchanged glances. Quiet, uncertain, teetering on the edge of turning against her. They weren't loyal. They were afraid of her, just like Ellen Ruiz had been earlier. And fear doesn't last forever. "Let's go," Madeline said tightly, motioning for her board lackeys to follow. "We're continuing inspections elsewhere." She marched past me, heels stabbing into the frozen trail, coat flaring behind her like a banner of authority she didn't truly possess. But as she passed, her gaze flicked toward my firewood rack in the distance. A quick, nervous glance she tried to hide. She wasn't conducting inspections. She was checking to see if her theft had been discovered, and it had. As she disappeared beyond the trees, I felt something shift in the air. The escalation wasn't random, it wasn't procedural, it was desperation wrapped in authority. Madeline Brooke had crossed a line she couldn't uncross, and the cracks in her facade were beginning to show. By late afternoon, the temperature had dropped enough for frost to creep across the cedarwood rack like a warning. The quiet of Pine Hollow Estates felt heavier than usual, as if the whole neighborhood sensed something shifting beneath the surface. After Madeline Brooke's theatrics on the trail, I expected her to retreat and regroup. Instead, the enforcer in crimson doubled down. A new notice appeared taped to my fence. Another accusation, another fabricated violation, another grasp for control. I tore it off and stuffed it into my jacket pocket as I walked toward the community storage shed, the one the HOA used to house gardening tools, event props, and anything else they claimed belonged to shared property. I wasn't there for documents or files. I was there because my gut had been pulling me toward one specific suspicion all morning, and professional instinct rarely lied to me. When I pushed the shed door open, the scent of burnt oak hit me instantly, subtle but unmistakable. The kind of smoke residue that clings to surfaces after a controlled burn, an odor that shouldn't be here. My pulse tightened. I stepped further inside, scanning the shelves, the bins, the floorboards. My fingers brushed a stack of folded tarps, some clean, some charred around the edges. The charring was old enough to cool, but new enough to still smell like last night's flames. That's when I saw it. A metal fire basin tucked behind a stack of unused signage, small, portable, and blackened along the bottom. A basin like that wasn't part of any HOA supply route. And the pattern of the burn marks, uneven, radial, irregular, logs stolen suddenly and burned quickly, leave chaotic burn patterns. Something you learn fast when training firefighters on flashover dynamics. Madeline hadn't just taken my wood, she'd burned it in here. The clipboard queen had used a community shed to dispose of evidence before hosting her hearth night. And because she didn't understand combustion science, she'd left behind residue patterns that told me exactly what she'd done. I crouched closer, examining the basin. A thin smear of resin dust coated the rim. Cedar resin, my brother's favorite wood to split. The scent punched straight through my ribs. I closed my eyes for a second, grounding myself. Then I spoke under my breath. You really thought no one would notice. Outside, a shuffle sounded. Footsteps on gravel. I turned sharply. Mrs. Klein, one of the older residents, hovered near the entrance, clutching a recyclable bag. Her eyes flicked from me to the basin, and something in her expression softened. She's been sneaking around here a lot, she whispered, especially on nights she holds those bonfires. I straightened. You've seen her? Her nod was small but certain. She comes late, carries logs in, leaves, soot everywhere. She hesitated, voice dipping even lower. I didn't want to say anything. She scares people. She doesn't scare me, I said. Mrs. Klein studied me quietly, then stepped closer. Without people like you, she gets away with everything. You should know. She bragged about those community fires, said she'd take whatever she needed. Rage crawled up my throat. Not the kind that makes you reckless, but the cold, precise kind that sharpens your next move. Thank you, I told her. She left quickly, eyes darting around like she feared being watched. And, honestly, she probably wasn't wrong. Madeline Brooke monitored everything. I returned my attention to the basin, the residue, the resin, the placement. It all painted a picture she couldn't argue with. This wasn't my firewood being redistributed. This was theft, misuse, improper storage of combustibles, unauthorized burning on HOA property, violations of county code and insurance mandate. Every infraction fell directly into my world, my specialty. I stepped back outside, locking the shed behind me. My breath swirled through the air in heavy clouds as the sky faded to a winter blue. The officer of rules had tried to weaponize policy, but policy wasn't her true enemy now. Science was. As I walked toward my house, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Ellen Ruiz stood by her car, purse clutched to her chest. She wasn't approaching me, just watching, torn, conflicted. She knew something she wasn't ready to reveal yet. I gave a small nod across the distance, a silent assurance. I wasn't backing down. She didn't nod back, but she didn't look away either. Progress in its quietest form. As I reached the porch, I paused at the cedarwood rack, 5 missing logs. One irreplaceable promise broken by someone who didn't understand the meaning of loss. Now, though, I had my discovery. Not documents, not hearsay. Professional evidence. Burn patterns that told the truth. And a board chair whose lies were about to combust under their own weight. By sunset, every shadow in Pine Hollow Estates felt sharper, longer, stretched thin by the tension Madeline Brooke kept manufacturing. The board chair had spent the entire afternoon parading through the neighborhood with her clipboard tucked beneath her arm like a badge of power. Every house she passed seemed to hold its breath. Every driveway she inspected, every porch she scrutinized. It all felt like a performance designed to intimidate. But intimidation doesn't work on someone who reads fire scenes for a living. I stood beside the cedarwood rack, the cold pressing through my jacket as I replayed the burn patterns I'd seen in the community shed. She hadn't just stolen and burned my brother's cedar. She'd done it recklessly, illegally, and without any understanding of the danger she'd created. Improper ventilation, uneven stacking, proximity to chemicals stored nearby. She'd turned that shed into a potential ignition trap. She didn't know it, but she'd already crossed into county violation territory. And now the stakes weren't just emotional, they were safety-based, legal, enforceable. As I inspected the remaining logs, something in the snow caught my attention. A faint set of tire tracks. Not car tires, something wider, rougher. ATV treads. My chest tightened. I followed the tracks carefully down the side of my property line. They cut through the fresh snow, leading straight toward the service easement road that ran behind our homes. That meant she hadn't just taken logs at night. She'd driven a vehicle onto private boundaries without permit approval. Another violation. Another opportunity. My boots crunched across the frost as I reached the easement. A sharp gust of wind slapped my face, carrying the faint scent of ash. Old, but distinct. The kind that lingers on clothing long after a bonfire ends. I inhaled slowly. Then I heard it. A distant whine, mechanical, irregular, the sound of an ATV. I moved behind a slope of brush just as the enforcer in crimson came into view, her red coat glowing under the fading winter light. She rode slowly, scanning the yards like a predator searching for weak spots. On the back of the ATV, a small metal bin strapped with bungee cords, a bin large enough to carry firewood. My stomach knotted. She wasn't finished stealing. She revved the engine, pivoting sharply toward the trail. Snow kicked up behind her, dusting the branches like flour. She stopped near the bend, right where Mr. Lewinson had spotted her last night, and hopped off the vehicle. That's when I saw it. She crouched beside a hollow log. Not one I'd placed for training. One she'd stolen and stashed. The clipboard queen lifted it with both hands, inspecting it like stolen treasure, unaware she was handling one of my demonstration models, the same controlled training logs designed to release a sharp flash when burned improperly. Not dangerous when handled correctly, but enough to create a scene she couldn't explain. A cold tension pulled across my shoulders. She'd hidden it here, waiting to use it during her next unauthorized community event. My brother's cedar logs reduced to props for her ego. My voice stayed, low as I whispered to myself, "You really don't know what you're playing with." She tossed the log into the ATV bin and hopped back on, peeling forward with too much throttle. The wheels slipped on the frost before catching again, sending her lurching forward. Careless. Reckless. Absolutely unaware that everything she touched left a trail I could follow, a trail I could prove. As she disappeared into the woods, I stepped out from behind the brush, scanning the area she'd just disturbed. Her tracks, her fingerprints, her burn patterns, they all pointed to a woman digging her own professional grave, and she didn't even know it. A crunch sounded behind me. I turned. Ellen Ruiz stood there, wrapped tightly in her coat, hands trembling around her phone. Her face was pale, eyes torn between fear and guilt. You saw her too?" she whispered. "I did," I said. Ellen swallowed hard. She told the board she had permission to use HOA equipment for the bonfires. She didn't. She lied. And she keeps making me sign things I shouldn't. Her voice cracked. If this keeps going, someone's going to get hurt. This was the opening, her internal struggle shifting into something sharper, something braver. "You know what she did," I said gently. "You know it's wrong." Ellen nodded, tears pooling. "I can't keep covering for her. Not after today, not after what she's planning." "What is she planning?" I asked. Ellen hesitated, breath shaking. "She's holding another hearth night tomorrow," she whispered. "She wants to burn everything. Everything, including the hollow logs." My chest went tight, not with fear, but with clarity. Purpose. The stakes had shifted. This wasn't about stolen firewood anymore. This was about stopping a disaster. Ellen's whisper hung in the freezing air, fragile and trembling, but heavy enough to change everything. "She wants to burn everything," she'd said, and the way her voice cracked on that last word told me she wasn't exaggerating. The clipboard queen wasn't just holding another unauthorized bonfire, she was planning to torch every stolen log she'd hoarded, including the hollow ones she didn't understand. The demonstration logs weren't dangerous when used correctly, but they produced a flash burst strong enough to trigger alarm, inspection, and immediate intervention. In the wrong hands, the scene could spiral fast, and Madeline Brooke lived for scenes. Ellen wiped at her cheeks, trying to hide the shaking in her hands. Her internal struggle sat on her shoulders like a physical weight, fear pulling one direction, her conscience pulling the other. I can't let her do this, she whispered. Not after what you found in the shed, not with people standing so close to those flames. You're doing the right thing, I said gently. You shouldn't have to carry this alone. She exhaled shakily. You don't understand. She makes me issue the notices. She makes me sign her name. She makes me send the emails at midnight so she doesn't get blamed when people get angry. Her voice weakened. And I kept going along with it because she threatens me, Trent. She always threatens me. I know, I said. I've seen how she treats you. She said she'd have me removed from the board if I questioned her again. She said she'd tell everyone I sabotaged HOA records. Ellen's breath hitched. But tonight, when I saw her prepping those logs in the shed, something in me broke. She's not just controlling people. She's dangerous. Dangerous was putting it lightly. Ellen looked toward the woods where the enforcer in crimson had disappeared minutes earlier. She wants to make tomorrow night the biggest hearth event yet, she whispered. She already told the board she's expecting a large crowd. Children, older residents, families. She's advertising it like it's some holiday celebration. I felt my jaw tighten. And she's going to burn stolen firewood. Ellen nodded. All of it. And she's going to burn a hollow training log she thinks is just cedar. A shiver ran through her. She has no idea what she's doing. No, I said quietly. She never does. The winter wind tore through the trees, scattering pine needles across the trail. Ellen looked smaller in that moment, fragile but brave, guilt-ridden but finally breaking free from the tyrant in heels. Her loyalty wasn't to Madeline anymore. It was to the truth. She opened her purse and pulled out her phone. After hesitating for a moment, she scrolled through photos, then handed it to me. I took these last night, she said. She made me help unload the wood she stole. The images were grainy but unmistakable. Madeline unloading my cedar wood into the shed, her hands on the stolen logs, her coat sleeve brushing the hollow one she'd stored for later. Ellen's voice softened. I didn't want to take pictures. I was afraid she'd find out, but something told me I might need proof one day. Proof. That word cut through the cold. This wasn't just testimony. This was evidence. Real, actionable, undeniable. My pulse steadied with purpose. Ellen, this is exactly what the county needs. Her head snapped up. County? Yes, fire regulations, misuse of combustibles, unauthorized burning, falsified safety claims. I exhaled slowly. She's violated every protocol in the book. Ellen swallowed. What are you going to do? Stop the bonfire, I said. Expose her. Make sure Chief Danner sees everything she's done. Her expression shifted, fear melting into relief, relief melting into something close to resolve. Trent, if you go to the county, I'll come forward. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything, even the parts that make me look complicit. You won't look complicit, I said. You'll look courageous. A weak laugh escaped her. I don't feel courageous. You are, I replied. You stepped up before anyone got hurt. Behind us, the last gold streaks of daylight faded. Ellen wrapped her coat tighter, breath trembling in the cold. She won't forgive me, she whispered. She doesn't have to, I said. You just have to tell the truth. Ellen nodded slowly. I will. This was it, the shift. The moment the secretary of the board stopped being the clipboard queen's shadow and became the key to everything. As she walked toward her car, shoulders still rigid with nerves, I felt something unexpected, hope. Because now I wasn't fighting Madeline Brooke alone. The first crack in her armor had finally appeared, and this time she wouldn't see the collapse coming. Night settled over Pine Hollow like a thick, cold veil, but my mind was burning, sharp, focused, alive. Ellen Ruiz's photos weren't just confirmation of theft, they were a turning point. The clipboard queen had finally left a trail even she couldn't manipulate. And now that I knew she planned to burn everything at her so-called hearth night, I didn't have hours. I had one evening to prepare a strategy airtight enough to withstand her lies, her temper, and the inevitable chaos she'd stir when she realized her control was slipping. I stepped into my workshop behind the house, flipping on the overhead lamp. The familiar scent of pine shavings, cold metal, and old leather washed over me. This place had always been my refuge, a space where I trained firefighters, wrote safety reports, and ran controlled tests long before the world learned my name. Tonight, it became something else entirely. It became the center of the plan. I unlatched the heavy storage case where I kept my training materials. Inside, it sat 4 hollow demonstration logs, lightweight cylinders used for teaching fire crews how flash patterns behave in low-oxygen environments. Safe under supervision, disastrous in the hands of someone like Madeline Brooke. I lifted one, feeling the smooth grain against my palms. "You wanted a bonfire," I murmured. "You're about to get a lesson instead." But this wasn't revenge, not even close. This was prevention. The board chair didn't understand combustibles, accelerants, oxygen pull, ember drift, or any of the things she pretended to regulate. And after seeing the burn residue in the community shed, I knew tomorrow's event could spiral from spectacle to disaster in seconds. I set the hollow log on my workbench and grabbed a small inspection light, checking each cavity. Precise, clean, predictable. These weren't explosives, they were teaching tools. But they created enough flash that any county marshal worth his badge would know something was wrong when he saw them burning. That was the point. Expose her publicly, safely, legally. I placed 3 logs aside, the ones she hadn't, touched, and focused on something far more important. Gathering the evidence that would force Chief Danner to intervene. Photos, burn patterns, the scorch marks in the shed, Ellen's timestamps, ATV tracks, everything she'd carelessly left behind. I arranged my documentation on the table, snapping photos from different angles, making sure every detail was crystal clear. My chest tightened as I reviewed the images of my brother's cedar wood, coated in soot inside the fire basin. A memory desecrated. A legacy burned without permission. That was when a soft knock sounded on the workshop door. Ellen, she stepped inside, still wrapped in her coat, eyes darting nervously as if Madeleine lurked behind every corner. I wanted to make sure you're really doing it," she said quietly. "Going to the county." "I am," I replied. "Tomorrow morning." She nodded, wringing her hands. "I emailed the board minutes from last month, the ones she altered. I know it's not much, but it proves she's been falsifying authority." "That's exactly what we need," I told her. "You just gave this plan a spine." Her breath steadied. A bit. "I'm terrified, Trent." "I know," I said, "but she's built all her power on fear. The moment someone stops responding to it," I gestured toward the evidence spread across the table. "Her whole structure collapses." Ellen stared at the photos of the burned logs, grief flickering across her face. "She doesn't even understand what she's doing. She keeps saying tomorrow's event will show the community she's in charge." "She's about to show the community something else," I said. Ellen stepped closer. "You're going to stop her, right?" I nodded. "I'm going to stop a dangerous fire event, yes. And she'll be the author of her own exposure." A shaky exhale slipped from her lips. "I'll be there tomorrow, at the event. If she tries to twist anything, I'll back you up." That was more than support. That was courage. I watched her leave, shoulders straighter than they'd been for days. The tyrant in heels had ruled by intimidation for so long, she never expected someone like Ellen to find her voice. But she had. And now, it was time for me to move. I placed the hollow demonstration log back in the case, the one Madeline hadn't touched. Then, I locked the remaining tools, grabbed my phone, and sent a message to Chief Danner. "Request urgent assessment of unauthorized community burn event. Evidence incoming at dawn." This was the final stage before confrontation. Tomorrow, Madeline Brooke would light a match she couldn't control, and I'd make sure the entire county saw what happened next. Dawn crept in slow and pale, the kind of winter light that made every breath look heavier, every decision feel irreversible. Today was the day the officer of rules planned her grand spectacle, her community hearth night, where she'd burn every stolen log as if fire could erase the truth. But she didn't know that her own actions had already built the case against her, brick by brick, ember by ember. I stepped outside with my evidence pack slung over my shoulder, the cold bit into my skin, sharp and sobering. The cedarwood rack stood exactly where it always had, dusted in a thin veil of frost, but I could feel the absence of the logs she'd stolen, like missing ribs in a chest. My brother's memory had holes in it now, holes she made, and that was enough to keep my resolve steady. Today wasn't about retaliation. Today was about exposure. I headed down the driveway and toward the community field, the designated location she'd chosen for her unauthorized bonfire. The place was empty now, quiet except for the whisper of wind slicing through the pines. But the ground told a different story: shovel marks, trampled snow, footprints from where she'd been prepping the fire pit in secret. I crouched, brushing my fingers over the indentation where she'd set the basin last night. The pattern was wrong, completely wrong. Logs arranged too tightly, oxygen flow restricted, residue from accelerant spray she probably thought was helpful. The clipboard queen had no idea she was creating a hazard waiting to ignite in ways she couldn't control. My breath fogged the air as I documented everything. Angles, impressions, chemical sheen. Each photo was another nail in the coffin she built for herself. A crunch of boots behind me made me stand. Ellen Ruiz approached cautiously, hands shoved deep into her coat pockets, shoulders drawn up as if expecting Madeline to jump out from behind a snowbank. Did she prep it last night?" she asked. "Yes," I answered. "Badly." Ellen let out a shaky breath. "She told the board she had fire clearance. She even said you approved the wood." "She lied," I said. Again. Ellen stared at the fire pit. "People are bringing their kids tonight." I didn't respond. The silence said enough. She swallowed hard. "Do you have everything you need for Chief Danner?" "Almost," I said. "I still need to track where she hid the rest of the stolen logs." Ellen hesitated, then stepped closer. "I think I know where she put them." My eyes narrowed slightly. "Where?" "The old gazebo on Maple Bend. She keeps the event supplies there. She told me not to go inside because it wasn't safe." Ellen met my gaze, which, now that I'm thinking about it, probably means she stored something she shouldn't have. It was exactly the kind of detail only a conflicted witness could provide, exactly the missing link I needed. "I'll check it," I said. "You did the right thing by telling me." Ellen didn't look convinced. "She's going to come after me when this blows up." "She can try," I said, "but the county will be standing on the other side of this, not her." Ellen exhaled visibly, trembling. "I'll be at the event tonight. If she lies, if she twists anything, I'll speak up." Her courage was still wrapped in fear, but courage nonetheless. After she left, I made my way to Maple Bend. The gazebo stood half hidden behind bare winter shrubs. Its paint chipped and peeling from neglect she pretended wasn't her fault. I approached quietly, scanning the perimeter, and there it was. The bin strapped to the back of her ATV, half covered with a tarp. Inside it, the rest of my brother's cedar logs. Anne sitting right beside them, one of my hollow demonstration models. The tyrant in heels had no idea she'd loaded a training flash log for tonight's fire. I crouched, inspecting the arrangement. The resin dust on the hollow log matched the burn patterns I found yesterday. She'd handled it, moved it, stored it illegally. And now she planned to ignite it in front of dozens of residents. Perfect, because ignition would mean intervention, and intervention would mean exposure. I photographed everything, each angle worse for her than the last. When I finished, I stood and looked across the cold morning field. Tonight would be the end of her facade, not by vengeance, by truth. As I headed back toward my house, my phone buzzed. A message from Chief Danner. "Arriving early evening. Show me everything." My pulse steadied. Tonight, the fire would tell the story. And for the first time in weeks, I knew the flames wouldn't take anything from me. They'd give something back. By early evening, Pine Hollow Estates buzzed with the kind of uneasy excitement that always came before one of Madeline Brooks' grand displays of power. Cars lined the snowy edges of the community field, residents bundled in coats and scarves, their breath rising in soft clouds as they gathered around the fire pit she'd built like a throne. Children ran in the frost, neighbors murmured, and right in the center of it all stood the enforcer in crimson, arms crossed, chin lifted, waiting for her audience to properly absorb her self-appointed authority. She didn't notice me at first. She was too busy orchestrating her spectacle. The fire pit had been restructured since morning. I could see her handiwork from 50 feet away. Logs stacked in a tight pyramid. Airflow restricted. Accelerant sprayed too close to the base. And nestled among the pile, half hidden under her stolen cedar, sat the hollow demonstration log she didn't recognize for what it was. I approached slowly, every step steady, deliberate. The evidence pack hung at my side, its weight grounding me for the confrontation ahead. This wasn't the battle. This was positioning. Every move mattered. Madeline finally spotted me. The clipboard queen stiffened, adjusting her coat as if straightening her armor. "You're late," she said loudly, ensuring the crowd heard. "But you're just in time to witness the spirit of community you refuse to contribute to." I ignored the bait and surveyed the fire pit. "You stacked it wrong." Her eyes narrowed. "I'm not interested in your critique, Trent." "Then you should be interested in safety." I crouched beside the pit, ignoring her huff. "Your logs are packed too tight. Oxygen can't circulate." "The officer of rules determines safety here," she declared, stepping closer. "Not you." A ripple moved through the crowd. People weren't accustomed to hearing her challenged, not publicly. But they leaned in now, watching carefully. "Madeline," I said, standing, "you're burning stolen wood, and you've mixed combustibles with an unapproved accelerant. It's a violation of 3 county codes." Her smile chilled the air. "You have no proof." "I have plenty." I held up my phone. Photos of the shed, the basin, the scorch patterns, the ATV tracks, and finally the hollow log she'd placed at the bottom of her stack. "Want to explain why this training log is in your bonfire?" Her expression flickered, fear flashing beneath arrogance. She hadn't expected me to identify the log, let alone document it. "I don't know what that is," she said quickly. "You touched it last night," I replied. "There's cedar resin from your gloves on the surface, and it's illegal to burn a hollow demonstration cylinder without the proper setup." The tyrant in heels swallowed. She wasn't used to being caught like this, not with an audience. A resident stepped forward. "Madeline, is that true? You took Trent's wood?" Her jaw clenched. "This fire is for the community. He was hoarding—" "That wood wasn't yours to take," another neighbor called out. The murmurs grew louder, heavier, shifting from curiosity to suspicion. The facade she'd worked so hard to maintain was cracking. I stepped closer to the fire pit and addressed the crowd. "This setup is dangerous. The accelerant she used will ignite too fast, and that hollow log will flash. Everyone standing within 6 feet is at risk." Madeline snapped. "Stop trying to ruin this event." "I'm trying to stop an accident," I said, "which is why I contacted the county marshal." Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. Madeline spun toward me. "You did what?" I kept my voice steady. "Chief Danner will be here any minute." Fear finally broke through her confidence. Her breaths grew uneven, her hands tightening on the edges of her coat. She turned toward the fire pit as if suddenly seeing it for what it was: unstable, unpredictable, dangerous. The crowd parted slightly when headlights swept across the field. A county truck rolled to a stop near the gazebo. Chief Danner climbed out, hat low, coat zipped against the cold, eyes already locked on the pit. Madeline paled. "Evening," the marshal called. "Got a report about an unauthorized fire event." The board chair swallowed hard. "This is just a harmless gathering, Chief." He cut her off. "We'll see about that." Every resident shifted, every breath held. This was the moment the match finally met the truth, and she knew it. I stepped back, letting the marshal examine the fire pit, letting the evidence speak louder than anything she could fabricate. The logs, the accelerant, the hollow cylinder, the stolen cedar. Her lies had built this pyre. Tonight, her accountability would light it. Chief Danner stepped toward the fire pit with the calm, steady presence of a man who'd walked into far too many scenes just like this. Events people swore were harmless, right before things went catastrophically wrong. His boots crunched over the icy ground, the quiet sound slicing through a crowd that suddenly didn't know whether to breathe or brace. And right beside him, rigid as stone, stood Madeline Brooke, chin trembling beneath the weight of an authority that was no longer hers. The enforcer in crimson tried to recover her poise, adjusting her coat, pushing her shoulders back. "Chief, this is merely a seasonal celebration," she said, forcing confidence she didn't feel. "Everything is under control." He didn't even look at her. His eyes were on the logs, the arrangement, the accelerant, the narrow chambering, the hollow cylinder tucked beneath stolen cedar. "Who set this up?" he asked flatly. Madeline opened her mouth, closed it, then pointed toward her board members as if desperate to share responsibility. "We coordinated the event as a committee," Hensley shook his head immediately. No, she did this alone. We weren't even informed of the layout. Murmurs spread through the crowd, neighbors finally speaking truths they'd held back for too long. The clipboard queen spun to glare at them, her composure cracking in jagged lines. "She's been taking wood from different properties," someone called out. "She told us it was required," another neighbor added. "She threatened fines if we didn't donate," someone else said. The tyrant in heels tried to shout them down. "Stop, all of you. This is my event." Chief Danner raised a hand. Silence dropped instantly. "Ms. Brooke," he said, "this setup violates county burn regulations on multiple levels." Her lips parted in disbelief. "That's not possible. You used a chemical accelerant in close proximity to hollow material," he continued. "You created a flash risk structure without ventilation, and you planned to light it in the center of a crowd." A wave of gasps rolled through the field. I stepped forward. "She also burned stolen firewood in the community shed. I have photos of the basin, scorch marks, and resin residue." Her head jerked toward me, eyes blazing with disbelief and fear. "You're lying!" "No," Ellen Ruiz said from behind her. "He's not." The entire crowd shifted as Ellen stepped through them, small, trembling, but no longer hiding. Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. "Chief Danner," she said, "she ordered me to sign her name on violation notices. She made me help unload wood she took from Trent's property. She told me the county didn't need to know about the bonfires." Ellen swallowed. "She planned to burn everything tonight." Madeline spun to face her, betrayal slicing through her expression. "You ungrateful little—" "Don't," Ellen whispered, flinching but standing her ground. The marshal's stare hardened. "Ms. Brooke, your secretary just confirmed misconduct under oath." "It wasn't misconduct," Madeline shouted. "I was maintaining order. I was enforcing community policy." "There is no policy allowing board members to seize private firewood," Danner said. "There is no policy granting you authority to hold unsanctioned burns. And there is absolutely no policy authorizing you to force others to falsify records." Madeline shook her head violently. "They're lying, all of them." "No," Mr. Lewinson said from the front of the crowd. "We've watched you steal, threaten, control. Enough is enough." Her control broke, splintering like frozen bark. She turned toward the fire pit, wild-eyed. "This event was supposed to prove I could lead. I built this community." "You endangered it," I said. She lunged toward the pit, grabbing one of the logs as if she could salvage her performance with fire alone. Chief Danner stepped in front of her before she could toss it into the basin. "That's enough," he said, voice low and final. "Step back." Madeline froze. Her breath faltered. Her ambition, her delusion of power, hung in the air like smoke. Slowly, the marshal turned to face the crowd. "This event is shut down, effective immediately," he announced. "I'm issuing a citation for unauthorized burning, misappropriation of property, falsification of safety documentation, and endangerment." The collective exhale from the residents turned into relief. Relief years overdue. Madeline Brooke staggered back, eyes glassy, fury dissolving into denial. "You can't do this. I'm the board chair." "No," the marshal replied. "You're under investigation." The crowd parted around her like a tide moving away from a sinking stone. She stood alone. Ellen stepped closer to me, voice barely above a whisper. "Is it over?" I looked at the evidence pack in my hand, then at the community finally exhaling in the cold night air. "It's just beginning," I said. "But her reign? Yeah, that's done." The fire pit glowed faintly under the marshal's flashlight, unlit, untouched, a monument to everything she tried to hide, and everything she'd just lost. The field emptied slowly, like a tide pulling back after a violent storm. Neighbors drifted toward their cars in clusters, whispering, processing what they'd just witnessed. A chapter had closed in Pine Hollow, but the air still crackled with the aftershock of everything the clipboard queen had done, and everything she'd tried to hide. The fire pit stood untouched, silent evidence of what could have happened if the flames she planned had been allowed to rise. Madeline Brooke herself remained off to the side, arms folded tight, eyes darting toward every shadow, as if searching for a lifeline. But no one approached her now. The enforcer in crimson had commanded fear, not loyalty, and fear evaporates when truth takes center stage. Residents gave her a wide berth, their trust gone, their patience dissolved. I stood near the gazebo, letting the cold steady my breathing. Chief Danner finished cataloging evidence, his flashlight beam flickering over the stolen cedar, the accelerant residue, the hollow demonstration log she'd never understood. He approached me afterward, his expression firm but not unkind. "You did the right thing calling me in, Calloway," he said. "She had no idea how close she came to sparking a disaster." "She didn't care," I replied. "Control mattered more." He exhaled. "It won't anymore." He slid his notebook closed. "I'll file the violation reports tonight. The county board will handle the rest." Behind him, Madeline tried to engage one last board member, but he stepped away. Her heels slipped slightly in the snow as she followed him, desperation leaking through every movement. "You can't just let them do this to me," she shouted. "I built this community." "No," the neighbor said, turning solemnly. "You suffocated it." Her face crumpled, anger and disbelief folding into something raw, fear she couldn't mask. She pushed past him and stormed toward the lot, the tyrant in heels leaving footprints that cut jagged lines through the frost. When she was gone, Ellen approached me slowly, hands tucked into her coat pockets, shoulders still tense but lighter than they'd been in weeks. "I didn't think she'd fall apart like that," she whispered. "She wasn't built to survive exposure," I said. "She needed shadows." Ellen nodded, eyes drifting toward the cold fire pit. "I'm glad you stopped her, and I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." "You did when it counted," I told her. "That's what matters." She hesitated. "Do you think the board will remove her?" "They won't have a choice," I said. Danner's report alone could dissolve her position. A faint, relieved smile tugged at her lips. "Maybe Pine Hollow will finally breathe again." I looked across the field, the families, the older couples shaking heads in disbelief, the teenagers laughing nervously now that the tension had snapped. They weren't afraid anymore. They weren't whispering around the edges of her authority. They were reclaiming their space, inch by inch. Community was returning. I gathered the evidence pack and walked toward my cedar rack on the hill. The sight hit me harder now that the chaos had settled. The empty spaces where my brother's gifted logs used to rest. Some of them were gone forever, burned in secrecy. But the others were safe now, returned before she could destroy the last pieces of him I still had. I placed a hand on the frost-covered wood, feeling the bite of winter against my skin. "You're safe," I murmured. "She won't take anything again." Behind me, Chief Danner called out, "Calloway, I'll be in touch with updates. Expect a formal statement by morning." "Thank you," I said. He tipped his hat and headed toward his truck, engine rumbling to life before he pulled away. The field grew quiet. Snowflakes began drifting down, soft and slow, settling over the fire pit like nature's way of closing the scene. Ellen lingered nearby, watching the falling flakes. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. "I will be," I said. "It's strange. When you fight someone like her, you get so used to the tension it feels wrong when it's finally gone." "That's trauma," she said softly. "She put the whole neighborhood through it." I nodded. "But it's over." Ellen took a breath, as if absorbing the truth. "Thank you for standing up first. It made all of us braver." A warm gratitude settled in my chest. We all did our part. She smiled faintly, then turned toward home. I stayed a moment longer, letting the cold quiet settle everything inside me. Then I faced the camera in my mind, the invisible audience riding through this with me, and offered the final word they had earned. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. And with that, I walked back toward the warmth of home, leaving the ruins of her reign behind in the snow.